Welcome to the Indian Sun. I'm Indira Lysram. My guest today is Peter Drew, artist, activist, filmmaker, and writer. Though Peter's artworks have been exhibited at major arts institutions around Australia, including the National Gallery, you've also probably seen them on streets throughout Australia. Peter is responsible for multiple poster campaigns, including Rail Australians Say Welcome and the portrait of the immigrant hawker Monga Khan titled Aussie, both of which have become ubiquitous in Australian cities. The uniqueness of Peter's works is that they quietly ask questions of passers-by, questions about national identity, about how we treat each other. Peter holds a master's degree from the Glasgow School of Art and is in the news now for his latest works inspired by COVID-19. Welcome, Peter, to our show.
Thanks for having me.
My last meeting with you was in 2016 when I interviewed you because you just completed, posting 100 posters and around the theme Rail Australians Say Welcome, and you also started your project on Monga Khan then. Let's first start with why this project is important to you.
I think that's a complicated question in a way because from the outside of things, there seems to be I'm sort of an odd choice to be the person making these posters and putting them up because I was born in Australia. I'm not really there's not an obvious connection between me and people like Monga Khan, I guess. And I guess how I make sense of it is that anyone can really feel like an outsider. There are all sorts of different ways to feel like an outsider. And I think that I've felt that way at various times in my life for all sorts of different reasons. And I think that most people can empathize with the outsider. I think most people actually feel that they are on the outside of things in some way. And so I guess it's being an Australian, that's part of our condition. It's part of our national identity for the outsider to be an immigrant. And that's, I guess, how I hit upon describing that. So there's a personal connection there, but it's sort of abstract, and I guess because I'm not sort of my parents were born here and my grandparents were born here, so so it's not obvious, but it is abstract in some sense.
But I also remember talking about this with you at length. You said that the question of identity is very important to you. But when I reflect on the question or the issue of identity myself, I feel it is very fluid. So tell me, why do you think the question of identity is important to you?
Well, that's a better way of sort of sharpening that first question, I guess, because it's a difficult thing to sort of nail down. But I do think identity is very fluid, and it's sort of, you can make a mistake, I guess, in and this happens within sort of identity politics these days, especially, but always, I guess, is that identities get thrust upon people, and the way that we're sometimes encouraged to overcome those identities is to create another false identity in order to overcome it. But really, all identity should be fluid in some sense, whether that's the makeup of our blood, that being our race or nationality, or our job, or the behavior we exhibit, the clothes we wear. It's all superficial in some sense. It's not entirely real. I mean, there is some substance to it, but none of it can really say exactly who we are. And so it is fluid in some sense. And so it says Aussie on all my posters. That's really it's a provocation. It's a way of opening up the discussion. That's not to say that being Aussie is the most important thing, certainly not, or that being Aussie or any other identity is something that can be nailed down and set and sort of declared this is Aussie and this is not. It's really to open up the discussion and then allow us to talk about identity in a fluid way, because I think ultimately that's what is the most empowering to individuals and gives us the most freedom.
Post-COVID, you have come out with different work. Can you tell us about your hugs posters and what you did in Melbourne last week? And you're also going to do something in Sydney. Are you continuing what you did in Melbourne in Sydney? Can you just elaborate a bit about that?
Sure. So last year, normally I travel all around Australia sticking up my posters. So I print them myself and then I travel around. So if you've seen an Aussie poster out in the street, then you sort of know that I was there and I stuck it up myself. But last year I couldn't do that because all the borders were closed. So I made a poster with two figures embracing in a hug, something we couldn't do because of COVID. And it said, "Together soon enough." And I made them available for free to begin with, to send out to people who promised to stick them up in public space. And after a while, I got too many requests, so I sort of started charging a nominal fee to keep sending them out. And people stuck them up in public space, which was a lot of fun for me to see, because normally that's something that I only do myself. But this year I can travel around again. So I have a set of new Aussie posters, 6 new ones, and I've just stuck them up in Melbourne. I'd like to go back to Melbourne and do some more. But in early June, I'll be going to Sydney, and slowly throughout the year, I'll make my way around the country, sticking up the new Aussie posters.
Okay, fantastic. And so, what is the larger discussion that you want to bring about with your posters?
Well, I mean, you can take. I mean, that question is very broad, and I don't want to sort of pin it down to anything sort of too topical. Could you perhaps put a finer point on that question for me, just so I can give you a good answer?
I mean, do you want people to get talking about what this poster means? What is the message that it is giving us?
Well, I mean, from the simplest way of looking at it is that sometimes I'm putting up posters and I'm wearing an orange vest, sort of the high-vis vest, so I just look like a worker on the street. And sometimes I can hear people talking about the posters as if I'm not there, because they don't realize I'm the artist. And people say they sort of take it at face value. They don't realize the photos are necessarily from the White Australia policy, or that they're from the National Archive. Other people might know a little bit more about it. So there are so many different ways in which people can respond to the images. But I think that there's no ultimate aim that I have. I really want to just stimulate the way that we think about what it means to be Aussie, because there's sort of an assumption with the word Aussie that is still sort of racialized in some sense. It's for some people. For a lot of people, I think that it sort of harkens back to sort of a white majority idea of what it means to be Australian. And ultimately, I don't think national identity, national identity has a old connection to race, essentially. And I think sort of breaking that down and making national identity more about the other values that we have, not racial values of, well, there are all sorts of different values, but breaking that association between nation and race is something that takes a very long time. And culture, like my posters, have a small role in that. And so it sort of just chips away at it and helps people realize that being Australian is fundamentally doesn't come down to race. It comes down to a sense of belonging, contribution in all sorts of different ways. So it's a very large topic, and whenever anyone asks, what am I trying to do with it? It's very hard to sum it all up. Hopefully the poster does that on its own. It sort of condenses that information into a very small package. But whenever someone asks me to try and expand on it, it becomes more difficult.
Interesting. So, what kind of inspirations, do you get from, when you come out with projects like this? Like you started with Monga, then you started with COVID thing. So, what are the sort of inspirations that you get?
Well, there's so much inspiration to be had. Often it's things that are happening in the news, what people are talking about. There's almost too much inspiration in that sense. And it'd be very easy to sort of come up with a new poster every week about what's happening that week in the news. So I try to see patterns and come up with some sort of statement which will still be relevant in a decade, in many decades' time. Um, and yeah, so I sort of try to focus on problems that don't go away in some sense. The original inspiration for the Aussie series with Monga Khan was just the political atmosphere in Australia in 2016, sort of 2015 into 16. It was a very sort of xenophobic time in Australia. There's always a little bit of that, I think, in any country. It's sort of, show me the country in the world where people like immigrants. Generally, there is always a feeling of fear towards the outsider. But 2016 in Australia was particularly bad, I think, because of the rise of ISIS.
And that's an asylum seeker problem as well at that time.
There was also the Lint Cafe siege, which really put people on edge. Like, there were a bunch of things that contributed to that, and all of a sudden, there were groups like Reclaim Australia, and Pauline Hanson came up again out of nowhere. She'd sort of disappeared for 10 years, and then all of a sudden she was back. And so, being Australian, feeling like I belong here, feeling like that there were great things about this country that I thought were being eroded and attacked by fearmongers, essentially. I thought I had some sort of duty to protect what I like about Australia. And that's what really motivated the project at that time.
And I also know that you've had overwhelming response to your work. I remember you talking about last time about this Mexican father whose daughter sent him a picture of Monga Khan and said, he looks like my grandfather.
Well, that's a funny thing, is that you'd think that you might assume that we have this idea of representation, and that in order to identify with somebody, we have to look like them, and that comes down to sort of a racial connection, that you see someone like Monga Khan and you feel a connection to him because you were born in that part of the world and your skin color is the same. But I think that there's something fundamentally false about that. I think that what it is that makes us really connect to a person is it happens on a deeper, almost spiritual level, in that we see a human being of some sort. And when you see an image like Monga Khan, someone like me, Mexican person, perhaps all sorts of different people, a part of you, not only we can see ourselves as that person, a part of you wants to be someone like Monga Khan because he looks strong and heroic, and you wonder, what was that man's life like? Is there something in him that I wish was like me? And that happens on a very sort of subconscious level. I think when we're children, it happens very, very easily when we are sort of watching a film or a cartoon or some sort of a story. Immediately we think, I am the person in the story, and this is a journey that I'm on. That happens very quickly, and it allows us to have empathy with the other and with the outsider. And so the whole racial element is a part of it, but it's really secondary. When you see somebody who you think of as heroic, and a part of you wishes you were them. And as soon as I saw the image of Monga Khan in the archive, I thought, that's a hero. That's somebody who I would want to be. And that the sort of the power of that image is very appealing. And so I understand somebody from the other side of the world that has no connection to Monga Khan. I can understand them wanting to identify with him.
And I suppose that sense of empathy creation also gives you a lot of satisfaction to what you do.
No, absolutely. Absolutely, because that's really what everyone's craving. There's sort of a feeling that empathy is a demanding thing, that it requires a certain amount of energy to give empathy. But really, that feeling of connection with other people is what we really need more than anything else. Is to feel recognized and that we are sort of sewn together with other people. That is what empathy is, and I think we crave that more than ever these days. There's this feeling of disconnection that can only be healed with empathy.
You also said that the posters that you pasted on cityscapes and the art that is hung in the galleries, they are two different things because both have two different messages. Can you explain that a bit more?
I do think they're actually quite similar. There's an obvious sort of connection between those works. I think it's just they function in a different way, because if you see an artwork, I think the core ideas behind the gallery work and my posters on the street, those core ideas are essentially the same. It's just they're made for different environments. If you see a poster on the street, it needs to communicate very quickly. You're not necessarily going to spend time with that image. You're driving past or walking past. An artwork in a gallery is something that you can spend time with and sort of find more details within over time. And so it just functions in a different way. And gallery work has more room for nuance in that sense, whereas a poster on the street needs to sort of empty itself of meaning very quickly, so that the person seeing it feels like they get it straight away. So that's the main difference, I think.
And you also currently have your exhibition going on at the Ann Porter in Melbourne.
That's right. I visited the gallery while I was in Melbourne, and that was very humbling to see my work in not only that institution, but in the company of so many other great artists. And it's kind of odd in a way, because I never thought of the posters, being in that sort of company, in that sort of institution. So it's very humbling, and I think people sort of recognize it as that being a sort of a form of recognition that gives the work some sort of status. But really, those posters are made for the street. That's when I see my posters on the street, that's really what makes me the happiest. So that's where I always intend to keep them.
And so after Sydney, in June, do you have any other projects which will be coming up?
Well, my wife and I had our first born child in December. So
I know. Yeah, congratulations on that.
Thank you. That's the my biggest sort of project for the year, is putting time in taking care of her and making sure things are working at home, and that's a big enough challenge as it is. Aside from that, I'll be putting up the Aussie posters throughout the year, visiting all the major capital cities. But for the first time in our lives, we're sort of figuring out how to balance our creative projects with something which is ultimately much more important. And so, I can't quite be as aggressive about putting up posters as I was in previous years, but I'll still get the work done. I might just do it a little bit slower than I did in previous years.
Yep. I guess fatherhood is very important, but do they travel with you as well when you are putting up these posters?
Well, Julie has traveled with me in the past, but I think it will be maybe next year. She might be old enough to travel with me, but it's easier for them to stay here and at this stage, because she's only like 4.5 months old. So it's driving across Adelaide is a challenge, let alone getting on a plane at this point. So, but we'll see. In the future, that would be really nice.
I thought I did see a photo of her with you somewhere. I think that would have been Adelaide, I guess.
That was in Adelaide. There was some posters that I put up last year, and I've had help from I have a nephew, a niece who has helped me put up posters before, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, when Jean is old enough, I'll definitely get her to help me put up posters, which will be great.
And in all this, you've also brought out your book, A Poster Boy, a memoir of arts and politics, right? Can you tell us some of the key takings from your book?
Well, writing the book was really a way for me to make sense of the whole journey, because I had gotten into putting up the posters and got very caught up in the momentum of the project. And a couple of years went by before I really thought, why am I doing this? What has really propelled me into this position, which was an odd place to be. And writing the book helped me make sense of it, and really helped me make sense of juggling art and politics, because when it comes to there's a sort of a conflict between the two, because if you are an artist and you sort of lean into activism, your art becomes a tool for change, a tool for some sort of political change. And there's a compromise in that exchange, because art should have a value in and of itself. In some sense, it shouldn't just be about changing something in the future. It should, in and of itself, achieve something. And so I've been thinking a lot about that recently, in the sense that what I really hope my art does is achieve something in connecting the people that see it to the people who are in the photographs or in the images. That in and of itself is an achievement, regardless of whether that person goes away and then votes differently or something like that. I think I talk a lot about that in the book, but also everything that happened to me on the street while sticking up posters. There were lots of very interesting confrontations in which I met people that had very different ideas to me. And you can only sort of get those confrontations by being on the street and engaged in putting up posters on other people's property. So
Interesting. Anything else that you wanted to add, for the audience to know, about your life, your work, your future plans?
Well, that's a big question. Well, no, I guess I'm just grateful for everyone's interest in the posters, and I very often get messages from people expressing that the posters made them feel more connected, or at least helped them to feel understood in their need and their desire to belong here and feel connected. And I always appreciate that. And so if there's anyone watching who's sent me one of those messages, then I greatly appreciate it. And I hope and it's very encouraging. Getting messages like that really helps me remember that the posters are beneficial to people. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for coming to our show. We will be following your work, and we will be hounding you again, I guess, for yet another interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.